A racist cop escalates a simple traffic stop into a terrifying confrontation, not realizing that someone nearby is recording the entire incident. The black woman he targets remains shockingly composed until she says a single line that flips everything. "We don't tolerate the attitude from your kind." The words slice through the humid air like a blade, echoing off the tinted glass of the woman's car. Officer Burke, a tall white cop with mirrored shades and a jaw clenched, too tight, leaned into the driver's side window like a predator savoring fear. The sun blazed overhead, casting long, unforgiving shadows across the empty parking lot. It was supposed to be a routine stop, a minor traffic violation. At least that's what his report would say later. In truth, he'd followed the mat. Black Tesla for 3 blocks after noticing the driver, a middle-aged black woman, alone, confident, calm. That calm made him itch. Across the street, in the shade of a bus shelter, a teenager held his phone vertically, eyes wide. He hadn't. He'd planned to film anything today. He was just waiting for his ride when the screaming started. "You got ID?" Burke snapped. The woman didn't flinch. Her hands were already on the steering wheel, 10 and 2, like she'd practiced for this very moment 1,000 times before. "My license is in the glove compartment," she said evenly, voice smooth, as silk but heavy with unspoken restraint. "May I reach for it?" Burke didn't respond. Instead, he barked, "Step out of the car." She hesitated, not in fear but in calculation. Her gaze flicked to the rearview mirror, then to the side mirror, then back to him. Something wasn't right. The tension was too thick. This wasn't about a ticket anymore. She opened the door, slowly. The second her heel touched the ground, he was already shouting, "Hands where I can see 'em! Don't move!" She froze. Then something unexpected happened. Burke pulled his gun. The teenager gasped, almost dropping his phone. People had been shot for far less. The woman, still calm, raised both hands, palms open, facing the sky. No tremble, no anger, just a strange, unnerving dignity. "You think I'm a threat?" she asked softly. Burke's grip tightened. "I said, shut your mouth." A pause, then he lunged forward, snatched the thin gold chain from around her neck, and held it up like evidence. The small pendant, a lion's head, glinted in the light. "You think this means something, huh?" he mocked. She stared at him, not his weapon, not his badge, him. Then she spoke, "You should probably check your surroundings before you ruin your life." Burke blinked. That wasn't fear in her voice. It was a warning. Then he heard it, a voice, clear and sharp, cut through the thick tension. "Yo, I got all of that on video." Burke whipped around. The teenager at the bus stop wasn't just filming, he was live. Comments were already flooding in, hearts floating across the screen, thousands of eyes on him in real time. The woman smiled, just barely. "They thought I was just another scared black woman," she said, stepping calmly back beside her car. "But the world's watching now." Burke's hand twitched. The gun didn't lower, and that's when she added, cool as ice, "You just pointed a loaded weapon at a federal attorney. Fade to black." Burke's hands shook. He tried to tuck his gun back into its holster without anyone noticing, but it was too late. The camera had seen everything, the weapon, the chain ripped from her neck, the line that chilled even the most loyal viewers. "You just pointed a loaded weapon at a federal attorney." She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't threatened, but her calm was louder than a scream. Burke glanced back toward the teenager, still filming, still live. A bus had pulled up behind him, but no one got on. Passengers inside pressed against. The windows, eyes wide, phones out. Across the street, sirens wailed. It was protocol to call backup for a non-compliant suspect. That's what he'd labeled it in the call. But now, with the internet watching in real time, every move he made felt exposed. The woman, he still didn't know her name, turned slowly and leaned against her car, hands still visible like she was teaching a class on how to survive a racial encounter with law enforcement. When the second patrol car pulled up, it was a young Latina officer who stepped out. She took one look at the scene and paused, her hand hovering near her holster. "What's going on here?" she asked. Burke didn't answer. The woman did. "He pointed a gun at me during a traffic stop, then ripped a necklace from my neck." The Latina officer blinked. "Ma'am, do you have ID?" "In the glove compartment." Burke stepped forward. "You don't need to. I'll retrieve it for her." The younger officer cut in. For the first time, Burke's authority slipped. The woman gave her a nod. "Thank you, Officer Lopez. Thank you, Officer Lopez." Lopez walked around to the passenger side, opened the door, and retrieved a slim leather wallet. She examined the ID. Her breath caught. She turned slowly and looked at Burke. "You ran her plate?" "No, didn't get to it yet," Burke said quickly. Lopez's jaw clenched. "You should have." She turned back to the woman. "You're Brianna Stone." "That's right." "As in the Brianna Stone?" The woman raised one brow just slightly. "There's only one." Burke's stomach twisted. He didn't recognize the name, but Lopez clearly did. The name hit her like a lightning bolt. "Federal Civil Rights Division," Lopez muttered under her breath. Brianna gave a small, tight smile. "You may have seen my name on a few federal subpoenas." Lopez looked pale. "Ma'am, You're doing your job, Officer Lopez." Brianna interrupted gently. "Which is more than I can say for your partner." The tension shifted like a seismic wave. Burke tried to salvage the situation. "I didn't know." "That's exactly the problem," Brianna snapped, and for the first time her voice sharpened. "You didn't know. You saw my skin, my car, and you made a decision. You assumed who I was." She took a step forward. "You didn't check plates, didn't ask for ID. You escalated, barked orders, then pulled a weapon." Burke's jaw moved, like he wanted to say something, but his mouth was dry. No words came out. "I have spent my life prosecuting cases like this," Brianna continued. "I've put people in prison for less than what you just did. You don't need to know my name. To know what you did was wrong." The silence was thick, then came the sound Burke feared most. Dozens of chimes going off at once. Phones, notifications, alerts. The video had hit Twitter. The caption read, "Cop pulls gun on unarmed black woman. She turns out to be a federal attorney." Within 4 minutes, it had 30,000 views. 10 minutes later, it was trending. News stations were picking it up. Influencers were reposting. Journalists were tagging Brianna's name. People were digging up her courtroom clips, her op-eds, her Senate testimonies. Officer Lopez took a cautious step back. "I'm going to contact the watch commander." Brianna nodded. Burke opened his mouth again, but Brianna beat him to it. "You don't get to explain this away." He tried anyway. "I didn't mean to." "But you did, and the internet doesn't need an apology. They just needed to see who you really are when you think no one's watching." Burke felt the world collapse inward. In a matter of seconds, his name had been pulled from public records and plastered across social media. His badge number, his precinct, everything, and the woman standing before him. She wasn't some faceless statistic. She was the one who trained the lawyers who prosecuted hate crimes. She was the one who testified before Congress about racial bias in policing. She was the one whose voice shook courtrooms into silence. Brianna Stone. And now, thanks to him, everyone knew her name again. She turned to Lopez. "Am I free to go?" Lopez hesitated, then gave a slight nod. "Yes, ma'am." Brianna got back into her car, closed the door, started the engine. Before she pulled away, she rolled down the window and looked at Burke one last time. "Call your union rep. You're gonna need him." Then she drove off. The sirens faded behind her. Burke was left standing in the heat, eyes still stinging from the glare. But now it wasn't the sun burning him. It was the fire of every camera, every screen, every tweet. And the irreversible truth that he wasn't in control anymore. He'd made a mistake, and now the whole world was watching. The video hit 1 million views before sundown. It was clipped, captioned, subtitled, and reposted across every platform within hours. The original live stream from the teenager's phone was raw and unfiltered, shaky at times, but every critical second was there. Officer Burke screaming, gun drawn, the ripped necklace, and the calm voice that shut the whole moment down. "You just pointed a loaded weapon at a federal attorney." That line was already being printed on T-shirts. People didn't even need context anymore. The moment had become a symbol, a lightning rod for decades of buried outrage. Burke sat in his apartment with the blinds closed, the television flickering muted news segments on every wall. They weren't saying alleged anymore. They didn't need to. The footage was crystal clear. Officer Daniel Burke has been placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation, one anchor read, her voice cold. But critics say that's not enough. Burke rubbed his face with both hands. His phone had died hours ago, not from lack of battery, but from too many notifications, too many voicemails, too many people trying to distance themselves. The key department had issued a brief statement. "We take all allegations seriously and are cooperating fully with oversight." That was it. No defense, no support, just protocol. He'd been in uniform 15 years, served in 3 precincts, kept his record clean, or at least clean enough, which, for most of his career, had been all that mattered. A few complaints, sure, a couple of use-of-force cases, a few dismissed. Lawsuits, but nothing had ever stuck until now, because this wasn't just a complaint. This was a woman with federal clearance and a massive public platform, and the whole world had seen what he did to her. The thing that terrified him most wasn't the investigation. It was her silence. Brianna Stone hadn't posted a single word. Online, no interviews, no tweets, no public statement. And that silence was deafening, because it meant she didn't need to explain herself. It meant the evidence already spoke louder than anything else could. It meant she was planning her next move, and Burke had no idea what it would be. Meanwhile, in a quiet townhouse on the east side of D.C., Brianna sat in her living room, scrolling, not through her own mentions, but through the messages sent to the boy who had filmed everything. His name was Jamal Ricks. 17, local high school senior, amateur videographer. His entire TikTok account had blown up overnight, not because of dance challenges, but because he'd happened to be standing in the right place at the right time. She smiled faintly at one message he posted. "Didn't think my phone would change history. Just glad I kept it steady." He tagged her in his thank you post. "To the woman who stayed calm, even with a gun in her face. You taught me more in 3 minutes than school did in 3 years. Brianna hadn't replied, but she would. When the time was right. For now, she was watching, listening, collecting. The calls had already started coming in, from journalists, activists, politicians. Civil rights lawyers offering to represent her, political consultants hinting at the possibility of a public statement, advocacy groups begging her to endorse their bills. She said no to all of them, because she wasn't done observing yet. That night, a primetime cable host ran a full segment on the incident. "Let's talk about what happened in that parking lot," she began. This wasn't just about a gun being drawn. It wasn't even just about race. Though make no mistake, race was at the heart of it. This was about what happens when arrogance meets accountability. When someone with unchecked power finally hits a wall. The footage played on repeat behind her. Brianna Stone didn't raise her voice. She didn't flinch. She didn't curse or threaten. She didn't even say who she was. Until it was necessary. Then came the pause. And when she did, you just pointed a loaded weapon at a federal attorney. The look on that officer's face told us everything. Burke watched the clip from his couch, hands clenched around a half-empty glass of whiskey. He didn't remember his face doing that. He didn't remember backing away, his hands trembling. He didn't remember his lips moving, his eyes darting. But the camera remembered, the internet remembered, and now it was immortal. Back in D.C., Brianna sat at her kitchen table with an open folder in front of her. Inside were documents, old court cases, testimonies, complaints from years ago, some with Officer Burke's name on them. It didn't take long to find them. Records were public if you knew where to look. And she knew exactly where to look. But what chilled her most weren't the documents themselves. It was the patterns. Burke had stopped black men in luxury cars, detained women for suspicious behavior in their own neighborhoods, used language that echoed the same tone he'd used with her. Most of it hadn't gone viral. Most of it had been buried under paperwork, bureaucracy, and fear. But now people were talking. Victims were reaching out. Old files were resurfacing. Quiet stories were suddenly loud, and Brianna, she was just getting started. The next morning, a legal memo was quietly sent to the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. The sender's name was redacted on the public version, but people inside the agency knew where it came from. It included a request for a formal review, not just of the traffic stop, but of Officer Burke's entire career. Attached were over 200 pages of case summaries compiled overnight. And the signature line on the cover letter? Brianna M. Stone, S.K. Burke got the knock at his door just after noon. It wasn't a raid, it was worse. It was internal affairs. Two men in suits, calm, polite, clipboarded. They asked him to come down to the station for a voluntary interview, and when he asked what it was regarding, one of them replied, everything. By the end of the week, the clip had over 12 million views. A new phrase was trending. Brianna didn't blink. The silence was over, and Brianna Stone was ready to speak. The press conference was announced only 6 hours in advance. No flashy headline, no dramatic teaser, just a simple tweet from Brianna's official page, tomorrow at noon, D.C. Federal Courthouse steps. My voice, my terms. That was all it took. By morning, the courthouse was surrounded, not by protesters, but by believers, survivors, advocates, legal interns in suits and grandmothers with walking canes, students skipping class, activists live streaming every second. News vans lined the blocks like a red carpet. Helicopters hovered. Above, Twitter was already trending. Brianna didn't blink. As we see you, Officer Burke. Justice on camera at exactly 12 p.m. The doors opened. Brianna stepped out. No security detail, no entourage. Just her. She wore a deep navy suit, no jewelry, hair pulled back tight, posture straight. A quiet storm in human form. The murmurs died the moment she took the mic. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't shout. She just began. I wasn't going to speak today. Her voice was steady, low, controlled. I wanted the video to speak for itself. I wanted the silence to make people sit with what they saw. Cameras zoomed in, phones shot upward like a sea of raised hands. But silence, she continued, can only last so long before it turns into complicity. A soft murmur of agreement. So, here's what I'll say, not as a victim, not as a lawyer, but as a black woman in America. Pause. I did not survive that encounter because I'm strong. I did not survive because I'm educated or because I'm a federal attorney. I survived because someone filmed it. The crowd inhaled. I survived because a 17-year-old black boy had the courage to hit go live instead of record later. I survived because the world was watching. More phones lifted. Reporters whispered into microphones. And if the camera hadn't been rolling, I don't know if I'd be standing here. Brianna let the weight of those words settle in the air. Heavy, personal, undeniable. But I am standing here. And because I am, I owe it to every person who never got to stand here. She scanned the crowd, eyes locked on faces who knew the truth before the cameras ever came. I filed a formal request for federal investigation into Officer Daniel Burke. not just for the events of that day, but for his entire record. Because what happened to me wasn't an isolated moment. It was a pattern that's been ignored, dismissed, and buried. Applause broke out. Not polite, not restrained. It was an eruption. "And let me be very clear," Brianna said, voice rising just a notch. "This is not about a single bad cop. This is about a system that protects him, promotes him, covers for him. A system that lets these men draw weapons when they feel disrespected." The crowd went quiet again. My case is one of many. I have heard from mothers whose sons never came home, from daughters who watched their fathers cuffed on sidewalks, from young men who learned to say "yes, sir" with tears in their eyes just to stay alive. She leaned forward. "And to every officer who watched that video and felt nothing, you are part of the problem." Gasps, nods, more claps, some cheers. "And to Officer Burke, I want you to hear this clearly." She turned directly to one. "Of the cameras, you didn't pull that gun because you were scared. You pulled it because you thought you could." A pause. "And you can't anymore." Boom! The crowd erupted. It wasn't just a speech, it was a reckoning. Miles away, Burke watched from a television in his precinct's break room, alone, uninvited, suspended. He looked hollow, her words hit like bullets. But what hurt more was seeing the reaction, the applause, the chants, the unity. She had turned his worst mistake into a national conversation, and he was the face of it. The department was silent. HR hadn't returned his emails. His union had scheduled a pre-disciplinary hearing. His partner, Officer Lopez, hadn't answered a single call since that day. Even his neighbors wouldn't make eye contact anymore. But the real blow came. Minutes later, his former colleague, Detective Karen Soto, went live on Instagram. Her message was clear. "I worked with Daniel Burke for years. I saw the way he treated black drivers. I filed complaints. I was ignored. But seeing that video, I can't stay silent anymore." She went on to list 5 incidents. 5. All eerily similar, all buried, all dismissed with a warning or reshuffling. And then came the twist. Karen had copies, reports, email chains, audio, clips from dash cams. She dropped them all in a Google Drive and posted the link publicly. In under an hour, Max Soto Files was trending. Back in D.C., Brianna stepped down from the podium. She didn't take questions. She didn't smile. She just walked. Away, not as a victim, not even as a hero, as a reminder that dignity isn't weakness, and silence is not surrender. The file was titled Soto Unfiltered. It spread through Twitter like a virus. Activists, journalists, law students, everyone was opening it, clicking, reading, watching. The first folder held old body cam footage. Some of it grainy, some of it crystal clear. One video showed Officer Burke screaming at a black teenager riding a bike through a gated neighborhood. "You don't belong here," he shouted, hand already on his holster. The kid had been delivering newspapers. Another folder contained emails, internal messages from concerned officers trying to raise flags, subject lines like "Burke again" and "pattern developing." In response, noted, handled, "Will monitor." They never monitored anything, and then came the voice memos from a sergeant, a public defender, a retired watch commander, all describing the same man. Short-tempered, power-drunk, racist. Detective Soto's voice was calm, measured. "I warned them years ago. I wrote it down. I spoke up in meetings. They told me I was being overly sensitive. They said Burke had command presence. What he had was unchecked power." The media latched onto the story instantly. By evening, Burke's name was no longer trending. It was being dissected. CNN, MSNBC, even late-night hosts were quoting the emails. The narrative had shifted. This wasn't about a single confrontation anymore. It was a system exposed. Inside her D.C. townhouse, Brianna stared at her laptop. She had read the Soto files. In full, every word, every timestamp. And as she read, her hands had tightened into fists she didn't notice until her knuckles turned white. Because one name in the report froze her breath: Deshawn Everett. She hadn't seen that name in years. It pulled her straight back to a courtroom, where the air had tasted like defeat. Deshawn was 15 when he was arrested. Burke had claimed he fit the description of a robbery suspect. No stolen goods were found. No fingerprints matched. But Deshawn had been cuffed, slammed against a car, and tossed into juvie anyway. By the time Brianna got the case, the boy was already broken. The charges didn't stick, but the trauma did. And now, here he was, buried in an old complaint filed by a whistleblower who had tried to save him from men like Burke, a complaint Brianna herself had never seen. She closed her eyes. This wasn't justice. This was a minefield of missed chances, forgotten names, unanswered. Cries for help. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. You probably don't remember me, but I remember you. Thank you for trying. Deshawn. She sat back, breath caught in her throat. Meanwhile, Burke was losing ground fast. He watched helplessly as his world disintegrated on screen. Talk shows were running timelines. Legal analysts were unpacking the Soto files live. This goes beyond misconduct, one expert said. This is institutional rot. Even the mayor weighed in. Let me be clear, she said in a press conference. If Officer Burke had been held accountable years ago, none of this would have happened. We are launching a full audit of prior complaints. And yes, criminal. Charges are now on the table. Burke slammed the TV remote into the wall. He paced his living room, muttering, blaming everyone but himself. He called his union rep. No answer. He texted his old sergeant. Nothing. The silence was deafening. Worse than hate. It was abandonment. Then came the email from Internal Affairs. Subject: formal notification of termination proceedings attachments. Notice of investigation, copy of public complaints, witness list. At the bottom, you are advised to retain legal counsel immediately. He screamed, but no one heard and no one cared. Back at the courthouse, Brianna met with Jamal Ricks, the teen who had filmed everything. He sat across from her in a clean hoodie, phone in hand, eyes wide with quiet respect. I just want to say, he began, I didn't think anyone would even care. You made the world care, Brianna said, smiling softly. I thought someone was going to take my phone, he confessed. Or like, come after me, she nodded. That fear is real. It's been real for all of us for a long time. He looked down. I kept thinking, what if I hadn't gone live? What if I missed it? She leaned in, voice steady. Then maybe I wouldn't be here. Maybe he'd still have his badge. But because you hit live, everything changed. He smiled, shy but proud. I didn't do anything big, he said. You did everything, she replied. Later that night, Brianna stood alone at her window, city lights blinking like memories. She thought of every file in that folder, every name, every silence she once accepted because she thought the system could fix itself. And then she remembered Deshawn's message. You probably don't remember me, but I remember you. She opened her laptop and started typing. Not an email, not a legal brief, a letter to Deshawn Everett. I remember you now. I remember your silence in that courtroom, the way your mother held her breath when I stood to speak, the way you couldn't meet my eyes when the judge threw out the case but still looked ashamed. I should have done more. I thought dismissing the charges was enough, but I didn't realize then what Burke had already taken from you, your dignity, your peace, your future. For a time, I carry that with me, every day. But now I know your name. And now the world does too. This time, I won't be silent. Brianna, the inbox was overflowing. After the press conference, Brianna had created a public tip line, just a secure form linked on her website. Nothing flashy. But within 48 hours, it had received over 2,300 submissions, names, dates, officer names, street corners, photos of bruises, PDF complaints, dashcam links, screenshots of ignored emails, descriptions so raw they read like confessions, the same themes repeated. He slammed my head into the hood. He laughed when I cried. They said there'd be no point reporting it. I tried to file a complaint. Nothing ever came of it. But it wasn't just Burke. Brianna noticed a pattern. His precinct was a graveyard of closed cases. Dozens of officers, dozens of victims, the same canned language, use of force within policy. Officer followed procedure. One woman wrote, "I wasn't scared of the gun. I was scared of how normal it felt." That line stuck in Brianna's mind like a splinter. She printed out 30 of the strongest testimonies, spread them across her office floor, red-marked them, highlighted overlaps, and then she saw it. 7 names, all within a 6-block radius. All black, all within the same 2-year window, all involving Burke, all dismissed. It wasn't negligence, it was design. Burke, meanwhile, couldn't leave his apartment, not because of orders, but because of fear. The doorbell rang once that morning. When he checked the peephole, it was a delivery driver, but the sight still made his pulse spike. He hadn't slept properly in days. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, calm, confident, unshaken. He scrolled his phone, searching for some kind of redemption, but his name had become a curse. Burke was now a slang term on TikTok, used when someone got exposed publicly for racism. He was a meme, a case study, a warning, and the worst part, he had no idea who he was without the badge. At City Hall, a councilwoman named Angela Mendez was making waves. She was young, black, and unflinchingly direct. "The problem is not just Officer Burke," she told the council. "It's the entire structure that let him thrive, that let victims get ignored, that let complaints go cold." She pointed to a screen behind her. It showed a map, red pins dotted across the city. "These are just the people who came forward this week. Imagine how many didn't." The chamber fell silent. "I'm submitting legislation today," she said. "An independent civilian oversight board, subpoena power, full transparency, no more burying the names." Applause erupted. But Brianna wasn't celebrating yet, because she knew how hard systems fought back. That evening, Brianna received a manila envelope. No return address, inside a single sheet of paper, no name, no introduction, just, "He hurt my sister." 2014, no cameras, no file. She never spoke again. But I remember. And at the bottom, "Please don't let them bury her too." She closed. Her eyes. This wasn't just about the living, it was about those who were silenced and stayed silent. She opened her laptop, created a new folder, named it The Forgotten. Burke's ex-partner, Officer Lopez, finally spoke out the next day. She stood in front of a small group of reporters. No podium, no microphone. "I worked beside him for 4 years, she said, "and I should have said something earlier." She paused. "I saw him get rough. I saw him escalate when he didn't need to. I saw him target black drivers more often. I thought I could fix it from the inside. I was wrong." One reporter asked, "Why now?" Her answer was quiet. "Because Brianna didn't blink, and because I did." Every time, in her office, Brianna stared at a wall now covered in names, victims, witnesses, whistleblowers. She pinned each one like a battle flag, not as evidence, as memory, as refusal. Her assistant knocked gently. "There's someone downstairs." "Media?" "No, it's Deshaun Everett." Her heart paused. She walked downstairs. He was taller now, leaner, a man. But his eyes were the same, quiet, wounded, strong. "Hi," he said. She didn't speak, just walked forward and hugged him. He froze for a second, then hugged her back. They didn't speak for a while. Then he said, I saw my name in your file. I didn't expect that. You should have, she said softly. You mattered then. You matter now. He nodded. I work with kids now, he said. Mentorship stuff, trying to stop them from getting pulled in like I did. She smiled. Sounds like justice, he shrugged. Sounds like survival. Then he looked up. Whatever you're doing, I'm in. Burke received another letter that night. It had no stamp. Someone had slipped it under his door. It read, You made me afraid to walk home, but now I see you're the one hiding. No signature, no threats, just truth. For the first time, Burke sat on the floor and cried, not out of guilt, but out of the sudden, unbearable realization he couldn't erase what he'd done. That night, Brianna uploaded a blog post titled, The Names They Tried. To bury, it ended with a line that would go viral by morning. We are not your footnotes, we are your reckoning. The website launched on Thursday. It was simple, elegant, brutal. Right there on the homepage, under a stark black banner, was a single line. If they tried to erase you, upload your truth. The portal allowed victims, whistleblowers, or anyone with documentation to upload files anonymously, testimonies, video clips, body cam timestamps, complaint forms, dash cam audio, legal documents, photos, medical reports, everything the city had ignored, everything internal affairs had dismissed, everything the department thought would stay buried, and within 72 hours, over 11,000 files had been submitted. Brianna had partnered with a group of legal interns from Howard University, a team of data engineers, a group of retired prosecutors, and 2 investigative journalists from the Washington Post. Their mission wasn't just to reveal Burke. It was to map the system that made him possible. Each submission was reviewed manually. Cross-checked, verified, victims were contacted, corroborations made, and slowly a new truth emerged. This wasn't one bad officer. It was a pattern, a network, a culture. There were officers who logged twice as many stops in black neighborhoods as in white ones. Officers with 30-plus complaints, none upheld. There were precincts with internal quotas, memos telling officers to increase visibility. In low-income areas, one whistleblower attached a PDF titled Daily Performance Tracker. Burke's name was listed 30 times in a single month. Beside it, +3, 3 stops, 2 citations, 1 escalation. Escalation. That was the word they used. Not brutality, not abuse, just a performance metric. Brianna read the file 3 times. Her hands trembled by the end. They were rewarding violence. Meanwhile, a 25-year-old activist named Corey Jennings went live on TikTok. His background, brick wall, black hoodie, no filters. Look, he said, I ain't no lawyer. I'm not a politician. But I've been that kid on the sidewalk. I've been that name in the file. And now they're telling us to upload receipts? Say less. He held up his cracked phone. This right here is all I had when Burke put me in cuffs for looking suspicious outside my own apartment. And now you're about to see how many of us there really are. He uploaded his arrest video, the bruises, the medical bill, his mother's voicemail. His post hit 2.4 million views in 8 hours. A GoFundMe he didn't start raised $120,000 for victims of police misconduct. Within 2 days, the total crossed $2 million. Burke saw the headline on his neighbor's newspaper. Justice. Goes Digital Receipts website exposes decade of abuse. He didn't bother reading the article. He knew what it said. He also knew what was coming. The union rep had finally called back, but only to warn him. They've opened a federal probe, Dan, not just local. DOJ's involved. Burke barely heard. His eyes were fixed on the screen. Someone had uploaded his entire personnel file. It was redacted, but not enough. Every complaint, every settlement, every time he'd been reassigned instead of fired, every time he should have been stopped, now public, now permanent, and his badge number, it was trending. Again. Brianna sat in a meeting room with 4 other attorneys. They'd formed a legal task force, volunteers from across the country, civil rights veterans, federal advisors, pro bono giants. Their goal, prepare a coordinated class action suit. She handed each of them a printed copy of what they were calling the Burke Bundle. 74 victims. We'll consolidate into 4 primary groups. By nature of incident, unlawful stops, use of force, harassment, and retaliatory arrest. The room was silent. Then one lawyer spoke. "You know this is bigger than him now, right?" Brianna looked up. "I'm counting on it." Across the city, in an elementary school gym turned town hall, Corey Jennings was now speaking on a folding chair stage. Cameras rolled, parents filled the seats, students stood in the aisles. "I know some of y'all worried. This is just another moment," he said. "Another headline, another story. But let me tell you, this ain't a moment. This is a blueprint." He pointed to a projector screen behind him, where the receipts site was live. "This ain't just about what they did. It's about what we ain't letting them do again." Applause broke out. Some clapped through tears. A grandmother stood and said, "My nephew used to walk with his hands up every day, like that would keep him safe. Thank you for making them see him." Corey nodded. "Nah," he said. "Thank you for never letting them forget him." At home, Brianna pulled out an old photo. Her father. He'd been stopped once, just once, but it had shaped everything. He never talked about it in detail, just said, "You always remember the way a hand feels on the back of your neck." She remembered asking him once why he didn't report it, and his answer had stayed with her forever. "Who do you report the system to, when the system built the walls?" She looked at the screen now, at the files, the voices, the receipts, and she whispered to herself, like a promise, "To us. We will report it to us now." The email came from Detroit. Subject, "Your site saved my son." The message was from a mother named Eliza Fay. Her son had been arrested 2 weeks earlier, falsely accused of stealing a phone in a coffee shop. No camera footage, no witness, just a hunch from a security guard who thought he looked like someone. The police refused to release the body cam footage until Eliza submitted a request through receiptsforjustice.org. Within 48 hours, the video was leaked. It showed the officer searching her son without cause, taunting him, then arresting him when he asked for a lawyer. The charges were dropped. The officer was suspended. The family was now suing. Eliza's final line in the email read, "I didn't know where to go before. Now I do." Brianna sat back in her chair and exhaled. The site had started as a tool. Now it was a blueprint. Within 2 weeks, 5 other cities had launched identical platforms: Atlanta, Oakland, Minneapolis, Baltimore, St. Louis. They all followed Brianna's model: secure, anonymous, data verified, and publicly accessible. It wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about visibility. People who had been told for years that nothing could be done were now watching the system respond, recoil, and in some places begin to change. This time, the walls weren't holding. Brianna was invited to speak on a national broadcast. Not cable, network. Millions were watching. The host introduced her as the civil rights firestorm we didn't know we needed. Brianna wore a simple charcoal blazer, no makeup, no glam team, just truth. "People ask me," she said into the camera, "what's the end goal of all this?" She paused. "It's not just about punishing Officer Burke. It's about making sure there's never another Officer Burke who gets ignored, who gets protected, who gets promoted after pulling a weapon on a woman for her skin." She leaned forward, voice clear and steady. "We don't want revenge. We want receipts. We want systems that show us what's happening, who's doing it, and what's being done to stop it. That's it. Truth, transparency, reform. And we're not asking any more. We're building it." The audience in studio stood and clapped. The host just said, "We'll be right back," but the camera caught him mouthing, "Damn." Burke watched that interview from his brother's couch. He hadn't been home in days. Protesters had started showing up outside his building, not in mobs, just a few at a time, holding signs, staring in silence. One held a sign that read, "We're still watching." He hated that more than the shouting, but what hurt more was the next phone call. It was from his lawyer. "Dan," the man said, voice strained. "They're coming after your pension." "What? They can't do that." "They can if they prove sustained misconduct." Burke stood up. "They can't take my fucking pension, man. I earned that." "You didn't earn anything, Dan. You buried things. And now they're dug up. And there's a paper trail." Silence. Then, "They filed 37 formal complaints into review, and the DOJ subpoenaed your precinct's internal database." He didn't respond. "You should settle. Quietly. Walk away before it gets worse." But Burke wasn't listening. He was already staring at the news ticker. City Council proposes permanent receipts legislation. All complaints, all records, all officers. He was being erased, not just as a cop, as a man. Meanwhile, at the Department of Justice, Brianna sat across from two federal officials. They asked her what her long-term goals were. She answered without blinking. A national system, centralized, mandatory, all departments. Her digital history of every complaint, every use of force incident, every dollar paid in settlements, all in one place, all public. One official asked, "And you think cities will comply?" Brianna stared at him. "They don't get to not comply." Blinked. She continued, "We're done begging. This isn't a campaign. This is architecture. You either help us build it or get buried under it." Later that evening, Brianna joined Corey Jennings at a youth summit in Baltimore. The crowd was full of students, educators, first-time voters. They were building something now, not just fighting back, but pushing forward. Corey took the mic. "I used to think justice was just surviving." He looked at Brianna. "But now I see it's more. It's creating a world where we ain't got to survive this stuff in the first place." Cheers. Then he added, "And for the record, next year, I'm running for city council." The room exploded, but every movement invites resistance, and Burke still had friends. A small but powerful police federation released a statement calling the receipt site a violation of due process and trial by internet. They called Brianna a political opportunist. And on cable TV, one angry pundit yelled, "We're destroying lives over a traffic stop." They didn't say Burke's name, but they didn't have to. Their silence was defense, and defense was alignment. Brianna saw the clip. She didn't flinch. Instead, she tweeted, "Destroying lives? We're just showing the ones you already destroyed." It went viral in 19 minutes. Burke sat in the dark, watching it all collapse, the memes, the speeches, the websites, and then, one night, a clip surfaced from 2016. He hadn't even known it had been recorded. It was dashcam footage from a quiet street. Him pulling a young black man from a car, shouting, shoving, no resistance, the boy crying, Burke muttering, "Act like an animal, get treated like one." It wasn't new, it wasn't surprising, but now it was undeniable. The first billboard went, "Up overnight right off the interstate. She wants to cancel cops. Stop Brianna Stone." Below it, in smaller letters, paid for by the Law and Order Alliance. It wasn't subtle, and it wasn't the last one. By the end of the week, there were 14 billboards in 4 states, radio ads, YouTube pre-rolls, TV pundits screaming about witch hunts and activist mobs. They called her a threat to law enforcement, a danger to public safety, a radical lawyer with a vendetta. Brianna saw it coming. She didn't blink. The real push came from within the system. A state senator introduced a bill, Digital Defamation Prevention Act, designed to restrict public sharing of officer misconduct unless fully adjudicated by a court. Which meant unless proven guilty beyond doubt, nothing could be shown. No footage, no complaints, no records. It was a muzzle law, and it was aimed straight at receiptsforjustice.org. News broke fast. Civil rights orgs scrambled. Activists took to the streets. But Brianna didn't issue a statement. Not yet. She was waiting because she had something stronger than anger. She had documentation. That week, she sat with a woman named Officer Renee Caldwell. Renee was a 15-year police veteran, respected. And clean record, community favorite. She slid a flash drive across Brianna's desk. "I saw what you're building," she said, "and I need to add something." Brianna opened it. It was an internal report, an email chain, a hidden memo, and a cover-up. The document detailed a complaint filed against Officer Burke in 2019. It had been marked unfounded due to lack of evidence. But the email thread told a different story. The department had video, they had witnesses, they buried it. One line in particular chilled Brianna to the bone. Too high profile to discipline without fallout. Recommend suppression. It was signed by a captain still on the force, and with it, Renee handed over a signed affidavit. "I won't be the blue wall anymore," she said. "Not for men like him." The next morning, Brianna called a press conference. But this time, she didn't speak. She let Renee, and what the officer said shook the nation. "Cover-ups aren't rare," Renee said into the mic. "They're standard, routine, just part of the process, until now." She held up the affidavit. "This is what happens when good officers stay silent. This is how the system protects its own, but not anymore." She stepped back, and then Brianna stepped up. "To the lawmakers trying to pass that bill," she said, voice cold. "This is your warning." She held up the file. "This is what we have. Now imagine what we haven't released yet." The bill was withdrawn in less than 48 hours. But the attacks didn't stop. Burke's defenders started pushing his narrative hard. News interviews with his family. Headlines like, "Former officer says his life was destroyed by a momentary mistake." Cancel culture hits law enforcement. "He lost everything over a misunderstanding." They aired a carefully edited clip of his 2016 incident. Cutting. Before the racial slur, they showed photos of him holding a baby, volunteering. The goal was simple, rebrand Burke as a victim. But the internet wasn't buying it. Receipts for Justice published a full, uncut version of the footage. 4 minutes long. No music, no editing, just truth. The caption read, "There's no misunderstanding in malice." It hit 10 million views in 2 days. Brianna was invited to testify before Congress the next week. She wore a black suit and a single gold pin, an open eye. Her opening statement was short. Transparency is not a threat, it's a cure. Some lawmakers pushed back. They asked about officer privacy, about due process, about whether victims were weaponizing the internet. Brianna didn't flinch. "Victims aren't weaponizing anything," she said. "They're finally being heard." A senator leaned forward. "Don't you think this movement has gone too far?" She looked him straight in the eye. "No, I think the silence went too far. We're just correcting the volume." That night back in D.C., Brianna received an envelope. No return address. Inside, a single newspaper clipping. Old, yellowed. It was a story about a young black man who died in police custody in 1996. No charges were filed. Cause of death, undetermined. Scrawled across the page in shaky handwriting, "Please don't forget him." She folded the paper gently, added it to the archive, and whispered, "I won't." Burke watched her congressional testimony from a motel room in Pennsylvania. He'd left the city 2 days earlier, said it was for his safety, but in truth, he just couldn't face it anymore. Not the cameras, not the protesters, not the truth. He called an old friend from the academy. "Everything's gone, man. My name, my pension, my life." The voice on the other end was quiet. "Maybe it should be." Burke hung up. For the first time, he didn't get angry. He just sat there, alone. Meanwhile, the receipts site expanded to include a victim fund portal for emergency legal help, a real-time complaint tracker showing open investigations, a blacklist database of repeat offenders flagged by multiple departments, and a legacy wall for names of those lost, ignored, or forgotten. It wasn't just a website anymore. It was an institution, a digital resistance, a permanent record. And Brianna? She knew the system would keep fighting, but now it wasn't just her fight, it was everyone's. The legacy wall went live at 6 p.m. sharp. It wasn't announced with press releases or promo videos, just a silent update to the homepage of receiptsforjustice.org, a new tab, Legacy Wall. When users clicked, they were taken to a stark black screen with a single quote. They thought no one would remember us. They were wrong. Then the names began to appear, one by one. Slowly, deliberately, each name hovered in the center of the screen for 5 seconds, then faded into the digital ether, replaced by another and another and another. No images, no backstories, just names, thousands of them. Names that had been left out of police reports, names that never made the news, names that had never even made it to court. Each one had a story attached. Click a name, and you could read a brief, verified summary. When it happened, who filed it, and what was or wasn't done. No edits, no spin, just truth. And as the wall cycled on endless loop, a counter in the corner ticked upward. 927 names uploaded so far. Brianna sat alone in her office as the site launched. Didn't speak, didn't tweet, didn't call anyone. She just watched the names roll by. Then came the name that made her breath catch. Jordan Miles, age 10, fatal asthma attack in squad car. No charges, filed. She remembered that name. It was the first case she ever cried over in private. She had been a junior clerk back then, still learning the ropes. She'd read the report 3 times, not understanding how no one had been held accountable. How a 10-year-old boy had begged for his inhaler in the back of a police car while officers laughed. And now, here he was, alive in the memory of a movement. Corey Jennings went live 2 hours later. He stood outside a mural wall being painted in Southeast DC. Behind him, rows of names handwritten in black spray paint. "Yo," he said, voice raw. "This ain't just a website. This is war against forgetting, war against silence. They tried to erase us, but we're unerasable." He held the camera close. "You see this war?" he asked. "It ain't done, 'cause the names ain't done." He turned to the mural artist, who nodded and added another name with a thick, controlled stroke, Ariel Knox. Corey turned back to the lens. "If they won't build monuments for us, we'll build them for ourselves." But not everyone was cheering. At City Hall, a group of officials met in hushed tones. One of them, Councilman Dre, was pacing, furious. "She's turning people into martyrs," he snapped. "This is going to spiral into full-on defunding demands, department audits, mass firings." A younger staffer said quietly, "But isn't that what they want?" Dre slammed his hand on the table. "No. What they want is a power shift. What they need is to be reminded who holds the gavel." That night, Brianna received a legal notice, a motion to shut down receiptsforjustice.org, filed by a coalition of police federations, citing psychological harm, character defamation, and privacy infringement. It was signed by 37 attorneys. Attached were screenshots, PDFs, and a request for full site takedown under emergency injunction. She read the last line aloud. "We request immediate and permanent removal of the website to prevent further reputational destruction." Then she laughed, soft, tired, but fierce, because she knew what they didn't. It was already too late. Receipts for Justice was no longer hosted on one server. It had been mirrored across 6 continents on 42 volunteer servers, managed by a growing group of legal tech engineers and anti-censorship orgs. Even if the government shut down the main domain, the backups were bulletproof. It had gone global. Brianna drafted her response the next morning. It wasn't legalese. It was a letter to the federations who tried to silence us. You are not protecting your officers. You are protecting the silence that let them destroy lives without consequence. You ask us to take down the truth. We ask you to take down the system that made it necessary. You want erasure. We offer memory, and memory is louder than fear. Brianna. Stone, she posted the letter as a public blog entry. By noon, it had been translated into 17 languages. Meanwhile, Burke was being deposed. A closed-door session, small room, 2 federal agents. On camera, they started simple. Did you ever falsify a report? No, he muttered. Did you ever see a colleague falsify one? He hesitated. Yes. Did you report it? No. Click. Another name pulled up. Do you recognize this person? He looked at the photo. A young woman, bruised, eyes swollen. He nodded. What happened that night? He stopped. The silence stretched. Then he broke. She spit at me, he said. That's what the report said. But she didn't. Then why did you say she did? He stared down. Because I knew nobody would question it. That clip leaked, just 17 seconds long, Burke admitting to lying. It spread like gasoline on a wildfire. Memes followed. Nobody would question it. Printed on shirts, posted on buses, stenciled onto police barricades. But then came the twist. Second clip, this time from an officer in the same department, recorded months earlier. He told me he made stuff up all the time, the officer said. Said it was easier than doing paperwork. Burke had opened a floodgate of confession, and the river didn't stop. At the next rally, Brianna spoke at a candlelight vigil. No stage, no mic. Just her, standing on a crate, flashlight in hand. These names behind me, she said, they weren't mistakes. They weren't isolated. They were the system functioning as designed. But now, she paused. Now we're designing something. Someone in the crowd shouted, "We are not erasable." The chant caught row by row, voice by voice. "We are not erasable. We are not erasable." And as the candles flickered, the city burned with truth. The hall was packed, not a courtroom, not a protest. Something new, a public tribunal built by the people, for the people. Rows of folding chairs stretched wall to wall inside an old converted church. The stained glass windows had been replaced with banners, truth before tradition, no more shadows. We remember. At the front of the room was a long table. Behind it sat a panel, 6 civilians, 1 empty chair in the center. The moderator called it the People's Gavel. In front of them stood a single mic on a wooden stand. Victims would come forward, tell their stories. No cross-exams, no time limits, no edits, just truth. And this time, the officers accused, they were required to sit and listen. Burke was one of them. He sat 2 rows from the mic, flanked by 2 plainclothes legal observers, but otherwise alone. No badge, no defense. Around him sat other officers, some retired, some suspended, some under investigation, all summoned, all present. The public had voted to convene this reckoning forum after the receipts wall hit 1 million verified views. Brianna's legal team had helped draft the terms. No legal verdicts, but full testimony admissible in future trials. All streamed live, all archived permanently, and no one could walk out. The first speaker was a young woman in a green hoodie. She didn't give her name. "I was 14, she began. "I had headphones in. I didn't hear them yell." She pointed at Burke without trembling. "He tackled me. Thought I had a weapon. It was a library card." The room was dead silent. I peed myself in front of everyone, my friends, my mom. I never wore that jacket again." She stepped back from the mic. Burke didn't meet her eyes. Next was a man with gray in his beard. 10 years ago, he said, I watched my brother get pulled from his car and slammed into the pavement because he reached for his registration too fast." He took a breath. "You know what I said at the time? I said, just comply next time." He paused. "I hate myself for that." A single tear slid down his cheek. "I didn't realize we could comply and still die." The next speaker was a teacher. I teach 8th grade history, she said, voice calm. We did a unit last year on civil rights. One of my students said, "But miss, they still get killed now, right?" She looked at the officers. He was 11, and he already knew the truth you spent your lives denying. Each story added weight to the air. You could feel the guilt thickening in the room. But more than guilt, it was shift. For the first time, these officers weren't the ones commanding the silence. They were absorbing it, and it was louder than any siren. When it was Brianna's turn, she didn't walk to the mic immediately. She stood in the center aisle for a moment, staring at the empty chair in the middle of the panel. Then she moved forward, took the mic, spoke softly. "I've said my piece before," she began, "but I realized there's something I haven't shared." She looked at Burke. "2 days before you stopped me in that parking lot, I spoke at a women's prison in Delaware." She took a breath. "A woman there told me she used to be a nurse, that she'd lost everything after a false arrest over a traffic stop that turned violent. She said, 'I thought they were there to help.'" Brianna turned to the audience, and she wasn't talking about criminals. She was talking about you. She looked back at Burke. "Do you understand what you did wasn't just a mistake? It was a message." She stepped back, then added, "And this is ours." Burke finally raised his hand, not to speak, but to be called forward. Gasps rippled through the audience. The moderator nodded slowly. Burke walked to the mic. He looked like a shadow of the man who once barked orders in parking lots and claimed control with every word. Now, he looked small, he looked human, but he didn't look sorry, not yet. "I made mistakes," he began. "I admit that." Murmurs. "But I didn't mean for things to go this far." He glanced at Brianna, then at the panel. "I didn't plan to become the face of this revolution." The room went quiet. "I just did my job," and for the first time all night, Brianna interrupted. "No, you did your version of the job. Not the one you were sworn to do, the one you got away with doing." Burke looked like he might respond, but then he didn't. He just nodded and stepped back. The moderator turned to the crowd. "Anyone else?" A hand went up in the back. An old woman, cane in hand, she shuffled to the mic and said one line, "I outlived my son, but today I got to outlive his silence too." By the end of the night, 27 people had testified. 12 officers had sat through every word. The reckoning room was never supposed to be a courtroom, but it was something worse. For the guilty, it was memory, it was evidence, it was witness. And when something is witnessed, it can't be undone. Outside, reporters waited. One asked Brianna, "Do you consider this justice?" She looked up at the sky. "Not yet," she said, "but it's the start of something that remembers us." The courtroom was packed. This time it wasn't a community center or a church. It was federal. The trial of Daniel Burke had begun. But the room didn't feel like revenge. It felt like a ritual. The public gallery was filled with faces who had once sat in silence. Now they watched from the front row. Corey, Renee, Jamal, Eliza, Deshawn, Brianna, they weren't just spectators, they were witnesses. Burke entered through the side door in a muted suit. No badge, no gun, just a man in a borrowed tie. He looked older, smaller, not because of time, because of truth. The charges were clear: deprivation of rights under color of law, false statements, obstruction of justice. Each count carried weight. But the heaviest thing in the room was silence. Brianna didn't speak in court. She didn't need to. Her work had already been entered into evidence. The receipts archive, the legacy wall, the testimonies from the reckoning room. Each had been submitted, cited, quoted. She had built the architecture. Now it was holding. Outside, the press asked her what she hoped would happen. She didn't say guilty. She didn't say prison. She said, "Whatever brings the silence to its knees." The jury deliberated for 3 days. The verdict, guilty. On all counts. Burke didn't flinch, he didn't cry, he just nodded and was led away. That night, the city didn't erupt in celebration. There were no fireworks, just candles, placed quietly outside courthouses, on sidewalks, on porches, each one for a name. Each one for someone who didn't get this kind of justice. Each flame whispered, "You are not forgotten." Back in her townhouse, Brianna packed up the last of her files. The site would continue, run by a coalition of lawyers and students now. The movement didn't need her to speak anymore. It had its own voice now, its own echo. She sat at her desk, turned on the mic, and began recording her final message. Final account. Transcript: they called me brave. They said I held my ground. They said I was powerful, but none of that matters. What matters is this. You don't need to be powerful to demand truth. You don't need to be fearless to survive. You just need to be remembered, to be seen. They pulled a gun on me, thinking I was no one. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I remembered every face that never got the chance to stand still. This story was never about me. It was about a 10-year-old boy who died in the backseat of a squad car, a girl who never wore her hoodie again, a nurse whose license was taken before she could save her own life, a father who stopped reaching for his wallet in public. It was about people whose names were never printed because the ink was too expensive for black pain. But now, their names are here, their names are digital, permanent, unerasable. She paused the recording, exhaled, then hit upload. That same night, Corey took the stage at a justice conference in Chicago. His voice was louder now, bolder. He read a line from Brianna's message, then added, "She gave us the blueprint. Now it's our turn to build." The receipts site added a new section the next day, Blueprints, a step-by-step guide to start local accountability sites across the country. By month's end, 27 cities had launched their own. It was no longer a movement. It was a network, a digital nation of memory. 6 months later, Burke's face faded from the news. But Brianna's didn't return, because she didn't need to. She had walked away with something stronger than headlines. She had walked away with proof, and proof, once seen, lives forever. In a small school in Atlanta, a teacher stood before her class. She pulled up the receipts wall, typed in a name. A student's hand went up. Who was he? The teacher smiled. He was someone the world forgot. But now, he never disappears. And somewhere in D.C., a boy walked past the mural. He paused, traced his fingers along the name, Maya Everett, his sister, gone, but no longer invisible. He whispered, "We remember." And in Brianna's old office, a note taped to the desk drawer. Handwritten, it read, "We didn't build this to win. We built this so they'd never delete us again."